Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Mr. N. Ram, a former editor of the Hindu newspaper, one of India's most respected journalists, and a petitioner in the case alleging surveillance, unauthorized surveillance with the use of military spyware called Pegasus, in a case that the Supreme Court has pronounced on a Wednesday afternoon, a far-reaching judgment by the Supreme Court. We shall talk about this over the next few minutes on freedom of the press, right to the fundamental rights of freedom of speech and expression, and the right to privacy of citizens. Mr. Ram, welcome to ThePrint.
It's a pleasure, Jyoti.
Now, the Supreme Court verdict is quite far-reaching, quite interesting in a time like this. Your first comments, you're a petitioner in the case, your first comments on this verdict.
I think it's a significant verdict, significant interim orders, and we welcome it because, the two main prayers of the various petitioners are actually 12 petitioners, including us, and our senior advocate, Mr. Kapil Sibal, led the whole set of arguments. The two prayers were which mattered. One is the government should be asked to say yes or no to the question whether they have Pegasus and have used it against Indian citizens. A number of them have been named in the petition because that's based on a leak. A large number of Indians were targeted using the military-grade spyware Pegasus, NSO's, and the NSO group's Pegasus. So that was the first. And the government, as you know, declined to come out with that. They came up with what the Supreme Court called a vague and omnibus and vague denial, which the Supreme Court didn't find satisfactory. But the government could not be compelled to file an affidavit stating yes or no. So we moved on from there, and the key prayer was please appoint an independent mechanism, investigative mechanism, headed by a retired or sitting Supreme Court judge. Sitting was not possible because there's so much work for the Supreme Court, but a retired judge, really, and a committee, and that has been accepted. The government countered this first by saying there's no need to entertain it. That didn't get anywhere because they said vaguely it was baseless allegations based on newspaper reports and so on. That's not true because it's much more than newspaper reports, although a lot of the good investigative work was done by newspapers. Remember that it was a consortium, including one Indian media organization, which really put out these names based on a whistleblower's leak.
Yes.
And but there was much more than that. For example, research done by Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto. That's probably the world's leading expert group on military-grade spyware like Pegasus and similar spyware. So, and then the government later on said that we will appoint our own expert group and we'll do, trust us, we'll do a good job. We can report to the Supreme Court. The petitioners opposed it, and the Supreme Court also rejected that proposal. And so we are very happy that that this prayer we sought has been granted. And the committee, the members have been named. A very reputed retired Supreme Court judge as is chair of the whole exercise.
Yes,
he has been given a lot of freedom to work out his procedure and bring in other experts and so on. Also, Jyoti, the terms of reference are very comprehensive.
Right.
Look at them.
Yeah.
They answer, if the committee digs into this and really comes up with answers, that would have answered almost all the questions that have been raised by us, by the petitioners, and outside. Legitimate questions, that is.
Yeah, so let's talk about these terms of reference. But, Mr. Ram, I just wanted to see, like you said, that the Chief Justice of India, Mr. Ramanna, along with his colleagues, Justices Suryakant and Hima Kohli, have delivered this really interesting verdict. But what was really interesting for me was that there's somebody on that on that bench is obviously a George Orwell fan, because the verdict starts with a George Orwell line which says, if you want to keep a secret, you must also hide it from yourself. And then goes on to say that the present batch of petitions raise an Orwellian concern about the alleged possibility of utilizing modern technology to hear what you hear, see what you see, and to know what you do. But my question to you is, as a journalist, as someone who's been a journalist for so many decades now, how do you describe the current atmosphere in our country today in which journalists are functioning?
The fact that there are clear indications that this Pegasus has been used against all manner of targets, all manner of individuals, apart from journalists, Prashant Kishore, at the height of the West Bengal election campaign, political leaders like Rahul Gandhi and his aides, Gagandeep Khan, a virologist, was a fellow of the Royal Society, because it is not clear whether her phone was actually compromised or just sought to be compromised, and several others, including
a minister in this government, Ashwin.
Yes. So while that is used, they've been able to brazen it out, saying that these are all baseless allegations made on hearsay or based on just media reports. Mm-hmm. And then also saying we have done nothing against the law, but we will refuse. We won't say whether we have Pegasus or not, and whether we've used it or not, because to reveal that would only help our enemies, national enemies, terrorists, and so on. So I think to be able to say that and get away with it until this point, up to this point, when the Supreme Court, exercising its power of judicial review in a judicious manner, in a nuanced manner, they discuss that, how judicial review comes in these interim orders. So they virtually got away with it in Parliament, despite the fact that in 2019, WhatsApp officially informed the government of India that using and exploiting a vulnerability in that app, Pegasus had targeted many WhatsApp users, including several Indians, including journalists.
Right.
And this was revealed in Parliament by the then minister, Sir Ravi Shankar Prasad. Yeah. And then said, we'll follow up and so on. Nothing has been heard of that. He's gone. Ravi Shankar Prasad is no longer in charge of that ministry. So it's very odd. So that's, I think, speaks to the atmosphere. Moreover, the Supreme Court in these orders has spoken about quite eloquently about the chilling effect.
That's right.
They call the chilling effect a phrase picked up from US. It's come into vogue from a US famous judgment that you don't have to actually suppress. If you create a chilling effect, it'll do your job for you, because people who will exercise censorship themselves will restrain their hand, their pen, their voice. And this is how you restrain journalism, tame journalism, if you like, particularly investigative journalism. The Supreme Court order also speaks about freedom of the press being a watchdog. And that really takes you to investigative journalism. So I'm very, very pleased with the various facets and insights provided in these orders.
But why do you think that the Supreme Court, in a sense, I mean, you didn't ask the Supreme Court to talk about the situation in the country regarding the freedom of the press, right? You were talking about alleged surveillance on, say, 300 or so odd Indians they've been allegedly surveilled. We don't know right now. Obviously, we don't know whether they've been surveilled or not. But this is like you said, the whistleblower that came out with this information some months ago. But it's interesting, isn't it, that the Supreme Court itself, like suo motu, if you like, has made all these statements, the chilling effect on the freedom of the press.
Actually, this was raised by the petitioners to a larger or lesser degree. The Editors Guild, for example, and in our own petition, we raised this question vis-a-vis journalism and the chilling effect. But we were delighted that they've gone into it more elaborately than anyone could have anticipated. So I think it's 46-page judgment. It's elaborately constructed, well written, well researched. And I think somebody who wants to know what the issue is, I think just has to read that narration or the facts.
Yeah.
About Pegasus and its the relevance to India. and the controversies that have arisen, the different contentions and so on. So I think, so yes, they've gone beyond previous judgments, many previous judgments in dealing with freedom of the press and the chilling effect and so on, and connected it closely to what has been alleged.
But why do you think the Supreme Court has gone beyond that? I mean, it was not, they didn't need to do it. But it's interesting that this particular bench has seen it fit to say these things.
Yeah, because the two key issues they talk about are the allegation that the right to privacy was infringed, grossly infringed, and closely related to that, they say, is freedom of the press. So they brought it in that context, because it's not just the right to privacy that has allegedly been infringed, because those are allegations, which I think are backed by facts, but that's for the people to decide.
Sure.
But alongside it, they give equal importance to the question of freedom of the press, and that's where the chilling effect comes in. So.
Yeah. So one of the things that was so...
It is unusual in recent times that the Supreme Court has elaborated on these issues. And we welcome that. All journalists who believe in independence and freedom must welcome that.
Absolutely. And what I found also really interesting is that the Supreme Court bench, it's in its verdict says that the state cannot get a free pass every time the specter of national security is raised. So it's almost as if the Supreme Court is censuring the government, isn't it?
Yes, because as a petitioner, in an ongoing case, I'll be quite careful about that.
Yeah.
But yes, they disapprove of a free pass, whether it's censuring or just cautioning, I don't know. But certainly, the government has been told, because they took cover behind that. There's no doubt about it throughout in their hearings, that it'll only help the enemies of India, terrorists and so on. So no free pass for you, just by citing the specter of national security, which is, I think, an important intervention at this time. So, and I think the people of India shouldn't give them a free pass either.
So, I just want to read out some reactions in the media this morning. ThePrint, where I work, my editor, Shekhar Gupta, he's called it a marvelous, succinct order, a landmark judgment. The Hindu, your former newspaper, says that the Supreme Court order instituting an independent probe is an effective intervention to protect citizens from unlawful surveillance, as well as a stern rebuff to the government's attempt to cover up the issue by using the bogey of national security. And the Indian Express said that the Supreme Court's move in the Pegasus case is a welcome and an emphatic reassertion of its role and responsibilities as the custodian of individual rights enshrined in the Constitution. So as much a comment on the Supreme Court itself, would you say?
Yes, I think they've come out strongly or firmly in support of the principles elucidated here. And I think where else would you take this except to the Supreme Court? So I think these lines that you quote from important publications, including yours, I read it regularly and listen to your, the podcasts and so on. So I think these are the people who speak up for freedom of the press and independence. But there are sections of the media which don't, which remain silent. And I'm sorry that they've not been persuaded by this. But I hope there'll be a large consensus within the Indian news media that these issues have to be taken up. This affects, among others, among journalists and the news media in this country, but they also affect others. It's really freedom of speech and expression. But the Supreme Court has chosen to focus on freedom of the press, freedom of the media, news media, and also talked about the chilling effect. So I think it's a very good contribution to the current discourse on free speech and expression.
Mr. Ram, can I just draw your attention to to the infringements on the freedom of the press in the wake of the revocation of Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir 2 years ago, when you know that newspapers were shut down again in the name of national security. Several journalists went to the Supreme Court seeking, praying that those rights of theirs be restored. But the Supreme Court took an inordinately long time to say very much. And in fact, the Press Council itself, to which all of us journalists look up to, also came out on the side of the government saying that no, in the name of national security, this is fine.
Yes, we have been very disappointed with the responses from several institutions in India. And I also joined in the criticism that I think the Supreme Court should have given priority to this question, and the Press Council, of course. So this has come as something refreshing, something that, more than a breath of fresh air. It's much stronger than that. That this has been taken up expeditiously. And the only reason they make it clear, the order not coming exactly on the date they indicated first, was that the people they approached, the experts they approached, were reluctant to join this exercise, to accept the invitation, either citing personal reasons or conflicts of interest. So that's the only reason. And I think it's in the order itself. They say they did their own personal search, that is the judges and perhaps the teams, and got this together. So we really appreciate that. But on the issues you mentioned, Kashmir, yes, there was huge disappointment in this country. Many lawyers also came out with their opinion that justice has not yet been done.
Now, in the Siddique Kappan case, for example, Siddique Kappan and 3 of his fellow journalists have been in a jail in Uttar Pradesh for the last 1 year. As you know, that last year they were on their way to Hathras to report on the rape of a young woman. But nothing, the matter is now finally in the Supreme Court, but it seems as if for the last 1 year, nothing seems to have happened on that.
I think the way he was picked up and detained is outrageous. And I think he also had COVID, developed it because of the awful conditions there, came to hospital and has been returned to prison. On what charges? What are these charges? And why has he not been able to get bail in the lower courts? But since the matter is coming up with the Supreme Court, we can only hope that he'll be free very soon. I think Mr. Kapil Sibal is taking up this case. That's what you told me, in fact.
That's right, yeah. But Mr. Ram, what does this show to you? The fact that the Pegasus military-grade spyware was allegedly used to surveil journalists, like you mentioned, Gagandeep Kang, an epidemiologist, politicians, Prashant Kishore, etc. What does this show to you? What is this? I mean, does it show to you that the government is afraid, but of what? And if so,
they want to. There's no respect for the rule of law, and clearly, if once it's established, it was done, and I think it has already been established because this has been the contents of several of these phones targeted has been uploaded to the website of Amnesty International, which has developed a software which has been validated by Citizen Lab, which I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And they have found that these phones, for example, Prashant Kishore's phone, these have been compromised. And we know what Pegasus can do. It's been widely described. It's even in the Supreme Court orders that in effect, they capture your phone. It's not just spying, not just snooping on some texts or some photographs and so on. They capture your phones, and they can even inject. I was in a discussion yesterday, and a former Supreme Court Justice Gupta made this point. You can inject all kinds of content, vicious content in it, that, implicating people who are completely innocent. For example, something to do with drugs can be injected, or some other offense. So I think the potential mischief, it's hardly imaginable what can be done with this, and I think that comes out. So already it has been established that several of these phones were compromised or attacked or targeted or compromised Who did it is the question. Who else could have done it is the rhetorical question one can ask. Because the NSO group says we sell only to governments and we are very responsible. Governments and government agencies. We don't sell to anyone else. Whether true or not, we have to take them at their word. But who else did it? Now, supposing for argument's sake, you assume that somebody else did it, some hostile force or some non-state actor in India or abroad did it. Is it not the duty of the government to investigate and find out and tell the people the truth? Tell the Supreme Court the truth? Tell us all, tell the media the truth about who did it? So it's been already established that it has been done in a certain number of cases. Who did it? So that's the question.
But, like you said, NSO, the Israeli company that has produced this Pegasus software, has denied selling it to anybody else across the world, except state governments and state agencies. But the fact is that, and like you said, in the verdict also, it's very clear that the government has not denied or confirmed whether, it certainly hasn't confirmed, but it hasn't denied either that this software has been used. And for some reason, we don't know why they haven't done that. But the question is, why do you think they're doing this?
I think that's the way of government. Power corrupts. And this kind of power, overwhelming majority, corrupts even more. To cite to allude to a famous statement by Lord Acton. And that is what it is. There's no check. And many institutions have failed to check that. There has been criticism of courts also earlier. But courts, you have to rely on our courts, and especially the Supreme Court. Several high courts have issued some very good orders, even several months ago, on individual liberties, on questions of, when people are just picked up and charges are concocted and so on, but not enough. And we expect more from our justice system. And this, I think, is a fine intervention through exercising the power of judicial review, which in a nuanced and balanced manner. So I think we have reason to, if not celebrate, feel particularly good about this moment.
So last couple of questions, Mr. Ram. The first is that you shone this spotlight on two institutions, on the press, where you've said that some journalists or some media have compromised, shall we say, with the government by not asking questions enough, or not asking the searching questions that need to be asked on a daily basis. And the second is on the judiciary, where you mentioned that the judiciary in the past has not lived up to the promises that the Constitution has made to its citizens. Now, what does this show to you? And do you think that things are changing in some way?
Yes, I think it's been widely noted that the Supreme Court, under the present Chief Justice, has opened some new pathways. I think not just in words, but in actual decisions. And this is a notable one. This is a very significant one. But also perhaps on other issues, appointment of judges, for example. I think, to the high courts and so on, there's been unconscionable delay by the government. It's very clear. I don't know on what criteria the collegium recommends unanimously, reminds them repeatedly. We know there's a shortage of judges in many high courts, and yet it's not filled. For what reason? On what justification can that be? If I go on? So I think the Supreme Court, I've already said some of the high courts have really done exceedingly well on issues relating to individual liberties and so on. They're not enough, perhaps, but quite a few have done it. But the Supreme Court on this major issue, I don't want to second guess what is going to happen with the committee. It has its task cut out, does all that, because the terms of reference are very broad and comprehensive.
Right.
All encompassing, I would say. They also have to recommend changes in the law and so on. But considering the issues on their plate, I think that they found time, the Chief Justice and his brother and sister judges have found time to to look into it in some depth, even in an interim order. They could have simply, without going into all this, they could have simply formed, ordered a committee to be formed, set up a committee, and so on. No, it's a reasoned order, these interim orders, and that's what I think makes it more special.
But your comment that this government has a huge mandate and that perhaps power corrupts, to quote Lord Acton. Do you think that this has led or is leading to a climate of fear in our country?
Yes, no doubt about it. There's huge fear in this country, but there are also spaces where people are freely express their opinion or are defiant, because India is so large and diverse. I lived during the emergency and saw that the censorship was total. A few voices, there was some underground literature of, not great circulation, but it was there, subterranean thing. But there was not the kind of dissent expressed during the emergency as there is today. That's the bright spot. On the other hand, a lot of the mainstream media, which have circulation, readership, influence, huge audiences, are unfortunately, I must say, playing a propaganda role in support of the government, or by either actively or by not bringing out, by default, by not bringing out facts, details about issues that matter, not discussing, providing space for discussing these. So that is why we really appreciate any opportunity to discuss it in depth and in a critical way. Critical questions are to be asked. Adversarial questions are to be asked of this. So I think there are still spaces in India. So I'm not as despondent about this as many of our colleagues are. I hear this all the time. Oh, it's terrible, and what can we do? The people get disheartened, dejected. I don't think this can go on too long. And these interim orders, I think, really show point to some hope.
Right.
Yeah.
You refer to the emergency, but Prime Minister Modi himself, this and his government, as well as the RSS, every year they mark the anniversary of the emergency, pointing to a period in our dark history where, when during the emergency, freedom of the press was not just suppressed, but it was sort of banned. So how do you look at this government marking marking the anniversary of the emergency?
Well, some of them were in jail, Vajpayee, Advani, and so on. Yeah. But a lot of the others, they gave letters of apology and came out. It's a very mixed bag. So I remember that very well, including some of the RSS functionaries at that time. So, they came out. Maybe they had their own personal hardships. I'm not going to judge at this point of time. But it's a mixed record. But to say that they were in the forefront of the opposition to the emergency would be stretching the truth. Of course, some of them did fight it, the saffron crowd, I mean. And some of the BJP leaders certainly fought the emergency and so on. But overall, I think it's not a shining record for political parties in this country, because neither the press nor the political system, I think, mobilized enough opposition to the emergency. I don't know whether it could have been done that easily. It's hard to judge that. But right. Even the media, some of them claim to have been heroes. I don't think so. I think some of them are on the point of surrendering and so on till elections were held. And it must be said that Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had some kind of political instinct. While awful things were happening, in fact, I've been reading some of the new literature on the emergency recently. Yeah. India's first dictatorship and so on. Yeah. And why did Indira Gandhi call elections? When all the sycophants and advisors, many of them said there's no need to. And when elections were called, they seem to have said we are going to do very well. But she had this sense that we are headed for trouble. And I think that was, you must give credit where it's due. It was an awful period. Her contribution was terrible. Sanjay's was worse. And there are many who collaborated during the emergency, but that sense prevailed. Some element of democratic conscience prevailed. I don't think it was because she thought she was going to win. It was inevitable. Now, will the present government do that? Will they relax any of their draconian measures? Will they let institutions function independently? Who knows? But I suspect that there may be, a lot of what is called acrasia is at play now. They're thinking, what you're doing is wrong. What you're doing is against your own interests, and yet you do it. It was raised in ancient Greek philosophy, and the matter is still very alive and current. Do they have that realization that these things have gone completely off, say on Pegasus?
Yeah.
That if they're, using Pegasus would be awful in this illegal manner, where you capture somebody's phone, all manner of targets, as I said. Do they have that sense? Are they going to pull back? Those are questions that you and I should be debating.
Absolutely. And the fact that 3 young students at a university in Agra have been put under the UAPA because they were ostensibly cheering for the Pakistan cricket team in the India-Pakistan match. I mean, things like this that are just so horrifying. But thank you so much for your time, Mr. Ram. We will be watching the probe into this, into the allegation of alleged surveillance by Pegasus. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for this conversation.